On the morning of December 6, 1917, railway dispatcher Vincent Coleman returned to the telegraph near Halifax's Richmond Yards. In the harbour, a ship was burning and drifting toward Pier 6. Coleman sent a warning into the railway network, trying to hold approaching traffic away from the danger. He would die near his post. The exact words of his final message survive in different reported versions, and one famous part of the story, whether he actually stopped passenger train number 10, is disputed. But the warning itself was real. Other inbound traffic stopped. The railway network was alerted. And while that message moved outward, most of the city still did not understand what was moving toward shore. The ship was Mont-Blanc. It had already collided with another vessel. Its crew had abandoned it and attempted to warn people. Fire had been burning for roughly 20 minutes. On the waterfront, responders approached. Spectators watched. Then, at about 9:05 in the morning, Halifax exploded. To understand how, it is not enough to find one mistake, one villain, or even one heroic message. The disaster grew from a chain: a wartime harbor under pressure, two ships on opposing courses, a cargo hidden by ordinary appearances, and a gap between the people who knew the danger and the people who did not. And after the blast, even the official answer about blame would change. Halifax was one of Canada's great wartime shipping centers. Bedford Basin gathered merchant vessels and troop ships for escorted Atlantic convoys. That made the harbor strategically vital and crowded. Wartime controls, pilotage, naval traffic, rail connections, and dangerous cargo all converged in a narrow piece of geography. The Narrows linked the basin to the outer harbor. On that December morning, Mont-Blanc entered through it, carrying war material intended for France. More than 360 metric tons of explosives, plus drums of flammable benzol on deck. Only a limited number of people ashore understood what that cargo meant. Coming the other way was Emo, a Norwegian vessel leaving Bedford Basin. It was sailing in ballast for New York, where it was meant to load supplies for occupied Belgium. It was not already carrying that relief cargo. The distinction matters, and so does the irony. A ship on its way to support humanitarian relief was about to become part of a catastrophe that would require relief from across the region and beyond. But irony is not responsibility. The ships approached in a harbor shaped by wartime urgency, and the surviving accounts do not give us the right to enter either bridge and invent certainty. Shortly before 9 a.m., the vessels exchanged whistle signals and maneuvered in the Narrows. Their exact positions, speeds, signals, and emergency movements were argued over afterward. Different proceedings reconstructed the approach differently. What is secure is the narrowing margin. Two large ships were moving on conflicting courses. Attempts to avoid collision did not prevent it. Mont-Blanc and Emo struck. Yet the collision was not the climax. It was the beginning of a delay, and that delay made the catastrophe larger. The impact damaged Mont-Blanc. Flammable material associated with the deck cargo caught fire, although the evidence does not establish one precise spark or ignition mechanism. The crew knew what lay below and on deck. They abandoned ship and attempted warnings toward shore. But the burning vessel did not remain safely in open water. It drifted toward Halifax and came against Pier 6. The fire grew. Most observers had no reason to recognize an ordinary-looking freighter as a bomb on the scale of a city district. The danger was not only what the ship carried, it was who knew. For roughly 20 minutes, the delay pulled people in opposite directions. Mont-Blanc's crew moved away and called warnings. The burning ship moved toward the populated shore. Firefighters and other responders approached because a ship and pier were burning. Spectators gathered along the waterfront or watched from windows. These were not people choosing to stand beside a known stockpile of explosives. They were responding to the event they could see, without access to the event hidden inside the hull. A wartime system designed around controlled information had placed an extraordinary risk in the harbor, but the knowledge needed to interpret that risk had not reached the wider city. Coleman's railway warning belongs inside that gap. A commonly repeated version gives him a polished final message, but contemporary reports preserve different wording. The record does support the essential act. He returned to the telegraph, sent a warning, and died in the Richmond station area. His message halted other inbound traffic and alerted the railway. He intended to stop passenger train number 10, but whether his warning was the reason that specific train avoided the blast remains disputed. The stronger truth needs no embellishment. Coleman used the network available to him, and that network carried danger outward before it began carrying help inward. At about 9:05 a.m., Mont-Blanc's cargo detonated. The Maritime Museum of the Atlantic interprets the blast at approximately 3 kilotons. Parks Canada describes it as the largest human-made explosion before atomic weapons. Those are attributed comparisons, not a universal all-time ranking. What matters is what that force did in a lived landscape. Buildings collapsed, fires spread through wreckage. A large harbor wave struck the shores. Windows shattered far beyond the waterfront. Richmond, the industrial north end of Halifax, was devastated. But this was never only a Halifax story. Across the water, Dartmouth was struck by the blast and wave. Near the Narrows, the Mi'kmaq community of Turtle Grove was directly hit. Jerry Lonecloud, a Mi'kmaq elder who advocated for the community, lost 2 daughters, Hannah and Rosie. Their names belong in the history because a map centered only on downtown Halifax leaves people outside the frame of the disaster, just as a story centered only on ships leaves communities outside the frame of consequence. The number of dead cannot be stated with perfect finality. Official interpretation commonly estimates about 2,000 deaths. Nova Scotia Archives presently identifies 1,782 victims by name and warns that a complete list is unlikely ever to be recovered. At least 9,000 people were injured, and many more were left without adequate shelter as winter closed in. Shattered window glass created an exceptional burden of eye trauma. A peer-reviewed historical study found 592 people treated for eye injuries and 249 enucleations. The figures are clinical. The reality behind them was not. The blast also damaged the systems needed to answer it. Streets were blocked. Buildings used for work, transport, and care were ruined. Fire and structural collapse created fresh danger, yet response began immediately. Residents, soldiers, sailors, firefighters, medical workers, and volunteers searched, carried supplies, treated injuries, and organized shelter. No single person owned that response. It came from many local actions linked to institutions that were themselves wounded. The disaster had spread through connected systems. Now survival would have to do the same. The railway warning that had moved away from Halifax helped alert a much larger network. Other inbound trains had been held, and 6 relief trains from Nova Scotia and New Brunswick arrived that same day. Massachusetts also sent substantial assistance, though surviving summaries vary enough that neat totals can mislead. The important reversal is directional. Before the explosion, a telegraph message carried danger outward. After it, rail lines carried medical workers, supplies, and relief inward. Coleman did not single-handedly create that response. He became one documented part of a network that began moving before the scale of the catastrophe was fully understood. In Halifax, Dr. Clement Ligoure treated injured people in his private hospital. He was a qualified physician, who had been denied privileges in the city's hospitals because of race. The explosion did not suspend that history of exclusion. It exposed the contradiction inside the response. A medical system could refuse a black doctor institutional access, then depend on the care he provided when thousands needed help. Ligoure's work belongs here not as a sentimental side story, but because it changes what "the city responded" actually means. Some people served through institutions. Others served despite the barriers those institutions had placed in front of them. By the next day, organized relief faced another enemy. A major snowstorm struck on December 7th, obstructing movement, transport, and communications. People already injured or without secure shelter now faced winter weather across fields of wreckage. The storm did not erase the response, but it changed its terms. Speed became harder. Access narrowed. A disaster that had begun with compressed maritime space now became a struggle across blocked streets and snow. The first hours had shown how quickly people could organize. The next day showed how fragile that organization remained. A Halifax relief committee had formed within hours of the blast, dividing work across medical care, shelter, food, transport, identification, housing, and damage assessment. The response was becoming administration, not because the emergency had become less human, but because thousands of individual needs could not be met by improvisation alone. On January 22, 1918, the federal government appointed the Halifax Relief Commission to manage long-term relief and reconstruction. The city now faced a second central question. After warning failed to reach enough people in time, could planning reach survivors before emergency shelter became permanent abandonment? Before rebuilding could supply a satisfying ending, official investigators tried to supply a satisfying culprit. The Rec Commissioner's inquiry began taking evidence in December. Its finding, issued on February 4, 1918, blamed Mont-Blanc's master and pilot and criticized failures to warn the city. It sounded decisive. In the emotional landscape after the blast, decisiveness had obvious power. Name the people responsible, draw a clean line from their conduct to the ruins, and make the chaos legible. But an initial inquiry is not the same thing as the last legal word. Civil litigation reopened the collision. The case moved through appeals, and in 1919 the Supreme Court of Canada divided fault between both ships. In 1920, the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council dismissed the later appeal, leaving that equal fault allocation in place. No criminal conviction emerged from this sequence. The point is not that nobody was responsible. It is that the first, simple answer did not survive as the final civil allocation. The collision had been contested before the ships touched, contested in the inquiry room, and contested in court. Responsibility widened. That reversal changes the 20 minutes before the blast. It prevents the story from becoming a morality play about one captain or one pilot. Navigation failures mattered. So did the wartime environment that concentrated dangerous cargo, shipping, secrecy, and limited warning inside one harbor. Describing those institutional conditions as part of the cause is a historical interpretation, not a quotation from the final court. But the record firmly defeats the claim that one person alone explains Halifax. The catastrophe passed through a system. The courts ultimately refused to place all civil fault on only one ship. The system built after the blast could be remarkably fast. By March 1, 1918, the reconstruction program reported 832 self-contained flats constructed or underway, while more than 3,000 repair orders had been processed. Those repair orders were not 3,000 completed rebuilds, but they show the scale of organized work. The hydrostone development emerged with planned housing, modern services, and open space. Reconstruction was not merely an attempt to restore what had stood before. In parts of the devastated North End, it became an attempt to build more safely and deliberately. But planned streets do not turn catastrophe into triumph. Turtle Grove's destruction, the deaths of Hannah and Rosie Lonecloud, racial exclusion, disability, displacement, and the names still missing from the victim record resist a clean ending. The blast's extraordinary burden of eye injury, together with blinded veterans returning from war, contributed to the conditions that gave impetus to the founding of the Canadian National Institute for the Blind in 1918. Parks Canada also identifies broader advances in medicine, social welfare, public health, and safer urban design after the disaster. These were consequences and contributions, not proof that one explosion single-handedly created every reform. At the beginning, one man sent a warning while a burning ship approached the shore. It is tempting to polish that moment into a complete legend. Exact final words, one train saved, one hero against one disaster. The documented story is less tidy and more powerful. Coleman warned a network. Others carried that warning. Still others brought relief back along the same lines. Investigators delivered one verdict, and later, courts complicated it. Halifax rebuilt, but not every loss could be repaired, counted, or equally remembered. The enduring lesson of the explosion is not simply that danger can arrive without warning. It is that warnings, risk, responsibility, and recovery all move through systems, and the way those systems are built can decide who understands the danger before the fire reaches shore.